All right, Malawi, grab your tea, your ensema, or whatever keeps you awake, because Peter Mutharika just dropped a speech so spicy it had diplomats choking on dessert. I'm talking about the State Luncheon that followed his inauguration, the one that sent social media into overdrive and left analysts scrambling for context. After years away from the front line, the former president returned to the highest office and used that very luncheon to frame a presidency aimed at service, unity, and stern accountability. He spoke directly and plainly, mixing reassurance with hard truths and signaling that his leadership will be hands-on and unforgiving to corruption. This report breaks down the 10 most significant lines and promises from that address, each one a piece of a larger picture that will shape Malawi's political and economic horizon. We'll parse the rhetoric, translate the subtext, and point out which of these declarations are potentially symbolic and which could become concrete policy. Expect a blend of measured news analysis and the sharp, candid tone that Global Pulse News is known for, balanced, bilingual, and unafraid to ask the hard questions. So sit back, tune in, and prepare. These are the 10 moments from the luncheon that Malawians and observers abroad should watch closely, because what follows next matters. When politicians say they love their country, it often sounds like a line from a movie. But when Peter Mutharika said, "I love Malawi deeply," it landed with an unusual sincerity. His phrasing framed the presidency as a duty rather than a prize, and the repetition of inclusive language, "this is about us," worked as both reassurance and a political anchor. The sentence aimed to defuse fear among those who did not support him and to signal continuity to those worried about instability. The phrase also functions as a rhetorical device designed to build consensus. By framing policy as a national project, the president invites participation and attenuates partisan blowback. At a symbolic level, saying he loves the country is a promise of guardianship, an appeal to shared identity that resonates in the corridors of power and in village compounds alike. In Chichewa, he added a line that translated roughly to, "The nation belongs to all of us," and that bilingual nod was not accidental. It deliberately acknowledged diverse constituencies. In short, the opening affection was more than sentiment. It set the tone for a government that intends to present itself as inclusive, serious, and morally responsible. But calm words can quickly become a warning. Listen closely to what came next. Mutharika reminded his audience that when he lost power in the past, he chose national peace over legal battle, a choice he framed as an act of statesmanship rather than weakness. He emphasized that stepping back from confrontation was intended to protect Malawi's fragile democratic fabric, stressing that peace has to be preserved even when it is costly to personal vanity. That message served two functions. It established moral credibility for his return, and it signaled to potential opponents that vengeance would not be his method. Yet he was quick to add that peace does not equal silence or complacency. It is a platform from which to act decisively. By invoking restraint, the president cultivated a narrative of measured authority, signaling both maturity and strategic patience. The diplomatic community responded positively, and within the country, many viewed the statement as an attempt to close old wounds and open new avenues for cooperation. In this context, the message was both a political positioning and a moral appeal, aiming to transform polarized energy into a collaborative agenda. That quiet restraint set the stage. Next, he made it clear that peace does not mean passivity. The luncheon contained a forceful anti-corruption message that was blunt enough to become a viral quote. "The honeymoon of looting government is over." This declamation was not mere rhetoric. It was an explicit warning to insiders across political lines that theft and mismanagement would face scrutiny. In practical terms, such a public declaration raises expectations for audits, prosecutions, and administrative reforms. Citizens will now measure subsequent action against that promise. By making the statement in a crowded hall with ministers and power brokers present, the president increased the political cost of ignoring that commitment. Observers noted that the phrasing combined moral condemnation with a tactical calculation. Curbing corruption helps stabilize macroeconomic expectations and rebuild donor confidence. Timing matters. The explicitness of the language suggested a deliberate effort to align domestic messaging with signals to international partners. The line energized citizens who demand accountability while setting up the presidency to be judged on tangible results. And that warning landed with brutal clarity. You can almost feel the room turn. One of the most candid moments of the address was his admission that there is no money in government, a stark appraisal of public finances that few leaders would state so plainly in a celebration. The acknowledgement functioned as fiscal realism, an attempt to align public expectations with economic constraints, and to prepare citizens for necessary policy adjustments. Admission of scarcity can be politically risky, but it can also build trust if followed by transparent prioritization and decisive action. The president used the sentence to justify a forthcoming agenda of austerity, resource reallocation, and targeted support for vulnerable households, while highlighting the importance of stopping leakages. In Chichewa, he reiterated that funds are limited, but pledged that work would continue, making the point that scarcity is not an excuse for inaction. This level of frankness created a short window in which citizens and markets will look for visible fiscal discipline measures. If the administration follows with credible expenditure controls and public audits, that honesty may convert into regained confidence. After admitting scarcity, he made it clear that honesty will be the new currency of governance. Mutharika framed his return not as a quest for personal power, but as an acceptance of duty, insisting repeatedly that his motivation was service to the nation. That framing aims to neutralize critiques that his comeback is self-interested, repositioning him as an elder statesman who took responsibility when called. His rhetoric of duty appeals across generations and carries moral weight in communities where elders are expected to guide rather than dominate. By presenting himself as a servant of the public, Mutharika sought to normalize sacrifice and long hours in office as noble rather than self-serving. Politically, this narrative can be stabilizing. It reduces polarization by suggesting continuity and shared purpose. Yet such claims will later be tested against appointments, budget priorities, and the behavior of his inner circle. If the language of duty translates into inclusive policy choices and transparent governance, the claim will have substance. If not, the rhetoric will be perceived as a cover for old patterns. He framed his return as duty, but the proof will be in the actions and appointments that follow.
The president's call for cross-party collaboration was both sincere and strategic. He urged political rivals to set aside personal grievances and work on rebuilding the country together. That appeal is classic in transition contexts. It seeks to broaden the governing coalition, reduce obstruction in parliament, and lower the risk of destabilizing opposition. Critics will question whether calls for unity mask power consolidation, but the immediate effect was pacifying. He underscored that national problems require national solutions, a message that resonated with a public fatigued by partisan conflict. In Chichewa, he reminded listeners that cooperating for common goods is culturally familiar, and he used that cultural frame to reinforce the appeal. The success of such an appeal depends on follow-through, concrete shared projects, and transparent mechanisms that include opposition voices. Institutionalizing cooperation through joint committees, shared oversight mechanisms, and open reporting would be the next step. Unity sounds noble, but it will require concrete compromises and transparent mechanisms to work. Perhaps the sharpest line was a direct warning to would-be embezzlers within his own administration. If you steal, I will come for you. The force of that sentence lies in its immediacy. It put ministers and officials on notice in public, a move that increases accountability through exposure. By making the commitment openly, the president also insulated himself politically. Any future scandal would contradict a clear public promise. This kind of preemptive accountability can deter opportunism, but it also raises expectations for enforcement that must be met to retain credibility. Analysts observe that the message served a governance function by aligning political survival with integrity, an incentive structure that is straightforward if implemented. To maintain credibility, the executive must support independent investigations and ensure that any probe follows due process. He meant business, a public notice that even his own allies would be held to account. Mutharika emphasized the importance of functioning institutions, a judiciary that acts independently, oversight bodies that investigate without fear, and a free press that reports without restraint. He acknowledged international praise for Malawi's election and used that to advocate for strengthening the rule of law. The argument was procedural. Democracy is not only about vote counts, but about the systems that sustain checks and balances over time. In Chichewa, he framed institutional independence as the citizen's protection against arbitrary power, underscoring the need for legal safeguards and funding for key bodies. Observers will watch whether this verbal support translates into legislative protection, budget allocations, and administrative reforms that truly shield institutions from partisan capture. Reinforcing institutional autonomy will require sustained political courage and public oversight. If institutions remain strong, they will act as the bulwark against arbitrary power and abuse. Turning outward, the president insisted Malawi wants partners, not pity. This was reflected in his message that he seeks investors rather than aid handouts. He announced plans to send delegations abroad to court foreign investment in agriculture, industry, and infrastructure, emphasizing sustainable partnerships. This shift in rhetoric aims to reshape Malawi's external image from recipient to collaborator and to attract private sector finance that can create jobs. Economists welcomed the intent but noted the need for concrete incentives, regulatory clarity, and political stability to convert speeches into capital inflows. The administration will have to offer transparent legal protections, clear fiscal incentives, and an improved business environment to make the proposition credible. He's selling partnership, not pity, but investors will ask for guarantees and tangible reforms. He closed the luncheon with a focus on immediate priorities: food security, fuel access, and fertilizer distribution, the three essentials he named as urgent for immediate action. The president pledged to secure supplies and stabilize markets quickly, signaling both operational focus and political responsiveness. Securing fertilizer before planting seasons and stabilizing fuel imports are technical, logistical tasks, but they are also politically potent because they directly affect household survival. By concentrating on these tangible items, Mutharika aimed to deliver early wins that could build public trust while longer reforms proceed. He emphasized coordination with regional, partners, and private suppliers and insisted the government would act swiftly and discreetly, where necessary, to avoid market panic. He also reminded the audience that success would depend on civic cooperation. Farmers, traders, and officials all play a role. But talk of supplies and seeds is only the start. The true test is delivery to the kitchen table. So that is the rundown, 10 declarations from the State Luncheon that define the opening posture of Peter Mutharika's new renewed presidency. This speech mixed heartfelt appeals, blunt economic realism, stern warnings, and a number of strategic signals intended for domestic and international audiences alike. But words matter only insofar as they are followed by action. The promises outlined at the luncheon now set measurable expectations for performance and accountability. Global Pulse News will track progress on each of these points, from anti-corruption measures to budgetary discipline to institutional protections, and report back with evidence and analysis. We invite viewers to engage in the conversation, to submit questions, and to hold leaders to their statements. Subscribe to Global Pulse News for ongoing coverage and join a community committed to clear bilingual reporting that honors the complexity of Malawi's politics. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and keep the conversation alive.